What happens when the people who are supposed to love you the most become the architects of your deepest pain? We've all been at a family dinner that felt tense, where unspoken words hung heavy in the air. But what if those words were spoken? What if a single sentence, laced with years of cruelty, could push someone over the edge? The story you are about to hear is a chilling reminder that the most brutal wounds are often inflicted not by strangers, but by those we share blood with. It's a story about a family, a dinner, and a single moment that shattered everything. We're about to delve deep into the events that led to a murderous outburst, and I promise you, you won't see it coming. Before we begin, if you enjoy stories that explore the darker side of human nature and the complex dynamics of family, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what we have coming up. Now, let's set the table for the dinner that ended in disaster. The air in Eleanor Vance's small apartment was thick with the scent of lilies and dread. The lilies were from her older sister, Charlotte. A peace offering delivered that morning with a note in her perfect, flowing cursive. "Let's make tonight a good one, Ellie. For Mom and Dad." The dread, however, was all Eleanor's own. It was a familiar, unwelcome guest that always arrived a day or two before any mandated family gathering. It would sit in the corner of her vision, a shadowy figure whispering reminders of every past slight, every condescending remark, every moment she had felt like a ghost at her own family's table. Tonight was her parents' 40th wedding anniversary dinner, a milestone that should have been a joyous occasion, but for the Vances, it was simply another opportunity to perform their carefully rehearsed play of a happy, functioning family. The cast was small but potent. The ever-stoic patriarch, Robert. The anxiously accommodating matriarch, Mary. The golden child, Charlotte. A successful lawyer with a picture-perfect husband and 2 angelic children. And Michael, the prodigal son, who had finally settled down. And then there was Michael's wife, Sophia. Sophia. The name alone was enough to make Eleanor's stomach clench. Sophia was not just a sister-in-law. She was a curator of discontent, a connoisseur of insecurities. She had a unique, venomous talent for finding the precise location of a person's deepest wound and pressing down with a perfectly manicured thumb, all while maintaining a dazzling, innocent smile. Her cruelty was an art form, disguised as brutal honesty or just trying to help. And for the past 5 years, since she had married Michael, Eleanor had been her favorite canvas. Eleanor checked her reflection in the hallway mirror, tucking a stray strand of mousy brown hair behind her ear. She had chosen her outfit with the care of a soldier selecting armor. A simple, high-necked navy blue dress. It was elegant but unremarkable. Her goal for the evening, as it always was to be forgettable. To blend into the wallpaper until it was safe to go home. Sophia, she knew, would arrive looking like a starlet gracing the red carpet, her dress clinging to her gym-honed body, her laughter loud and demanding of attention. Sophia didn't blend. She conquered. The dread had started 3 days ago, with the family group text from her mother. Dinner at the Gilded Sparrow on Saturday at 7 p.m. to celebrate 40 years of your dear father and me. So excited to see you all. Let's make it a special night. Zoxo, the replies had come in swiftly. Charlotte. Wouldn't miss it for the world, Mom. The kids are with a sitter so we can all relax. Can't wait. Red Heart, Michael. Soph and I are in. Looking forward to it. Eleanor had waited an hour before typing her own reply, her fingers hovering over the screen. Sounds lovely. See you then. The words felt like a lie. It wouldn't be lovely. It would be an ordeal. The root of the animosity between Eleanor and Sophia was a tangled, thorny thing. It had started small, with backhanded compliments and passive-aggressive jabs. "Oh, Ellie, you're so brave to wear your hair like that. I could never pull it off," Sophia would say, her eyes scanning Eleanor's far-from-perfect locks. Or, "It must be so relaxing to have a job like yours, without all the pressure to, achieve things." Eleanor was a librarian at a local university, a job she loved for its quiet order and the gentle rustle of turning pages. To Sophia, a high-powered marketing executive, it was a quaint, pitiful failure. But the real schism had occurred 2 years ago. Eleanor, after a decade of quiet suffering and a string of failed relationships, had been trying to have a child on her own through IVF. It was a deeply personal, emotionally fraught journey that she had shared only with Charlotte and her mother. The first 2 rounds had failed, leaving her emotionally and financially drained. She was preparing for a third and final attempt when, during a particularly vicious argument between Michael and their father, her mother had let it slip. She had been trying to defend Eleanor's withdrawn nature, saying, "Be gentle with her. She's going through a lot with the IVF treatments." The room had fallen silent. Sophia's eyes, which had been flashing with anger at her father-in-law, had slowly turned to Eleanor. A strange, calculating smile had touched her lips. She hadn't said a word. But a week later, at a cousin's barbecue, Sophia had cornered Eleanor by the drinks table. "I just think it's so incredibly selfish of you," Sophia had said, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. Eleanor had blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" "The baby thing," Sophia had clarified, swirling the ice in her gin and tonic. "Bringing a child into this world without a father is not fair to the kid. And spending all that money when you can barely afford that shoebox apartment of yours. It's just desperate, don't you think?" Each word had been a perfectly aimed dart. The insinuation that she was selfish, a bad potential mother. The jab at her financial struggles. The final, crushing verdict. Desperate. Eleanor had felt the blood drain from her face. She had mumbled something about it being none of Sophia's business and fled, locking herself in the bathroom until Charlotte came to find her. The 3rd round of IVF failed. The doctor had gently explained that her chances were now statistically negligible. The grief was a vast, empty chasm inside her. She had told her family she was taking a break from the process, but in her heart, she knew it was over. The dream she had nurtured for so long had died, and somehow Sophia knew it too. From that day on, every interaction was peppered with references to children. Sophia would talk endlessly about her friends' baby showers, post incessant photos of her nieces and nephews on social media, tagging Michael with captions like, "Don't we make the cutest babies? Winking face, when are we getting started?" She would steer every family conversation toward parenting, all while throwing pitying, knowing glances at Eleanor. Eleanor took a deep, shuddering breath, pulling herself back to the present. The lilies on her table seemed to mock her with their vibrant, fertile beauty. She grabbed her purse and keys, the cold metal a small, solid comfort in her clammy hand. It was time. The Gilded Sparrow was the kind of restaurant the Vances loved. It was expensive, tastefully decorated in shades of cream and gold, and quiet enough that you didn't have to shout over your food. It exuded an aura of respectable success, which was the family's preferred brand. Eleanor was the first to arrive. She gave her father's name to the hostess and was led to a large, round table in a semi-private alcove. She sat down, her back to the wall, a strategic choice that allowed her to observe everyone else's arrival. She ordered a glass of Sauvignon Blanc and took a small, nervous sip. Her parents arrived next, her father looking distinguished in a tailored suit, her mother fussing with his tie. They kissed Eleanor's cheek, the scent of her mother's cloying perfume and her father's crisp aftershave filling the air. "You look nice, dear," her mother said, her eyes doing a quick, critical scan of Eleanor's dress. It was her standard greeting, a compliment that always felt like a prelude to a suggestion for improvement. "Charlotte and Mark are just parking," her father announced, checking his watch. "And Michael called. They're running a bit late. Traffic." Eleanor nodded, taking another sip of wine. Typical, she thought. Michael and Sophia always made an entrance. Charlotte and her husband, Mark, arrived a few minutes later. Charlotte, as predicted, looked effortlessly chic in a silk blouse and tailored trousers. She exuded a warmth and confidence that Eleanor had always envied. She hugged Eleanor tightly. "You came," she whispered in her ear. "I'm so glad. Wouldn't miss it," Eleanor whispered back, the lie tasting sour on her tongue. The first 30 minutes were deceptively pleasant. They ordered another round of drinks, and the conversation stayed in safe, shallow waters, Mark's latest business trip, their father's golf game, a new exhibit their mother had seen at the art museum. Eleanor remained mostly silent, offering a nod here, a small smile there. She was a spectator watching the performance from the cheap seats. She could feel the wine beginning to loosen the knot in her stomach, and for a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to hope that tonight might be different. That hope was extinguished the moment she saw them. Michael and Sophia stood at the entrance to the dining room, Sophia's hand possessively on Michael's arm. She was wearing a crimson dress that seemed to drink in all the light in the room. Heads turned as they walked toward the table. They were a handsome couple, radiating success and a certain smug satisfaction. "Sorry we're late," Michael said, leaning down to kiss his mother. Sophia had a last-minute crisis at work. "Oh, you know how it is," Sophia said, her voice musical and breezy. "Putting out fires. Someone has to be the breadwinner." She winked, and Michael gave a weak, slightly forced smile. The comment hung in the air for a moment. Michael had recently been laid off from his architecture firm and was exploring his options, which was family code for unemployed and playing video games. Sophia, meanwhile, had just received a major promotion. It was a classic Sophia move, a joke that doubled as a public emasculation of her own husband and a reminder to everyone else of her superior status. She slid into the chair next to Eleanor. "Ellie, so good to see you. That's a very sensible dress." Eleanor's smile felt brittle. "Hello, Sophia." The waiter arrived to take their order, providing a welcome interruption. But once he was gone, Sophia turned her full attention back to Eleanor. The interrogation began. "So, what's new in the thrilling world of books?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "We just acquired a first edition of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own," Eleanor said, her voice quiet. "It's quite exciting." Sophia's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Wow, thrilling," she said, drawing the word out. She then turned to the rest of the table. "Can you imagine? Spending your days surrounded by all that dust and other people's stories. I'd go absolutely mad from boredom. I need to be out in the world, making things happen." "It's a very important job, dear," their mother interjected weakly. "Preserving our culture." "Of course, Mary," Sophia said, patting her mother-in-law's hand. "I'm just saying I couldn't do it. I'd feel like my life was passing me by." She looked directly at Eleanor. "Don't you ever feel that way, Ellie? Like you're just watching from the sidelines?" The appetizers arrived, a colorful platter of cured meats, cheeses, and olives. For a while, the conversation became general again. But Eleanor could feel Sophia's eyes on her. She was a predator toying with her prey, waiting for the right moment to strike. Eleanor tried to engage with Charlotte, asking about her children, but Sophia would inevitably insert herself, turning the conversation back to a topic that allowed her to shine. The main courses were served. Steak for the men, fish for the women. The clinking of cutlery filled the tense silences. It was during a lull in the conversation, as everyone was focused on their food, that Sophia made her next move. "Michael and I have some news," she announced, placing her fork down and beaming at the table. Michael looked up, a deer-in-the-headlights expression on his face. He clearly hadn't been prepared for this. Sophia reached out and placed her hand on her flat stomach. She looked at Michael, then back at the family. "We're pregnant." A beat of stunned silence, and then the table erupted. Mary gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Robert let out a booming, "Congratulations." Charlotte squealed with delight, getting up to hug both Michael and a preening Sophia. Eleanor felt the air leave her lungs. It was as if a physical blow had landed in her stomach, hard and sharp. She watched the scene unfold from a great distance. Her family fawning over Sophia, the woman who had belittled her own private, painful struggle for this very thing. A baby. The one thing Eleanor wanted more than anything in the world, and the one thing she could never have. She plastered a smile on her face. Felt like a mask made of cracking porcelain. "Congratulations," she managed to say, her voice sounding thin and reedy to her own ears. "That's wonderful news." Sophia's eyes met hers across the table. They were glinting with triumph. This was not just an announcement. It was a victory lap. "Thank you, Ellie," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "We're just so thrilled. I can't wait to be a mother. It's the most important job in the world, isn't it? To create a life." The rest of the meal passed in a blur for Eleanor. The conversation was now entirely dominated by the baby. Names, nurseries, due dates. Eleanor felt herself shrinking, becoming more and more invisible with each passing moment. She pushed her food around her plate, the expensive sea base tasting like ash in her mouth. She drank her wine too quickly, pouring herself another glass, and then another. The alcohol did little to numb the pain. It only sharpened the edges of her anger. She could feel the storm brewing inside her, a hurricane of grief and rage that had been building for years. Every condescending comment from Sophia, every pitying glance from her mother, every time she had felt lesser than in the shadow of her perfect sisterhood was all swirling together into a toxic, volatile vortex. It was time for dessert and coffee. The anniversary cake was brought out, a decadent chocolate creation with "Happy 40th Anniversary" written in gold icing. They sang the obligatory song, and her parents blew out the single candle, looking, for a moment, genuinely happy. As the waiter cleared the plates, Sophia leaned back in her chair, one hand still resting protectively on her abdomen. She sighed contentedly. "You know," she said to the table at large, "I was a little worried about telling everyone tonight. I didn't want to upset anyone." Her eyes flicked to Eleanor, a deliberate, unmistakable movement. Charlotte, sensing the dangerous shift in tone, tried to intervene. "Well, it's wonderful news, Sophia. We're all so happy for you." "I know," Sophia purred, "but some people can be so sensitive about these things, especially when they've had disappointments." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Everyone at the table knew exactly who and what she was talking about. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Her mother looked at her plate. Her father cleared his throat, and Charlotte shot Sophia a look of pure fury. But Sophia wasn't finished. She looked directly at Eleanor, her smile a cruel, sharp slash in her beautiful face. She leaned forward, as if sharing an intimate secret, but her voice was loud enough for the entire table to hear. "It's a shame you'll never know what it's like to be a real woman, isn't it, Ellie?" she said, her voice dripping with mock pity. "But then again, after what happened with David, maybe it's for the best. Some people just aren't meant to be mothers." David. The name was a key, unlocking a room in Eleanor's mind that she had kept boarded up for 15 years. A room filled with shame and guilt, and a grief so profound it had no name. No one in her family ever spoke the name David. He was a secret she had carried alone, a ghost that haunted her waking moments and her dreams. And Sophia somehow knew. She had found the key and had just used it to tear the door off its hinges in front of everyone. The world went silent. The clatter of the restaurant, the murmur of other diners, the anxious breathing of her own family all faded away. The only thing Eleanor could hear was a roaring in her ears, like the sound of a tidal wave approaching from a great distance. Her vision narrowed until the only thing she could see was Sophia's triumphant, smiling face. The air crackled. The dread that had been her constant companion was gone, replaced by something hot and white and pure. It was rage, a rage so absolute, so clarifying, that it felt like a religious experience. For the first time in her life, Eleanor Vance was not afraid. She was not sad. She was not invisible. She was pure, unadulterated fury. And she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she was about to do something terrible. The carefully constructed dam of a lifetime of suppressed emotion was about to break. Time did not slow down. Fractured. In the second that followed Sophia's words, Eleanor's reality splintered into 1,000 sharp, glittering shards. Each shard held a different image, a different memory, a different pain. She saw a teenage girl, her own face pale and terrified in a sterile clinic waiting room. She saw her mother's disappointed eyes when she'd confessed, her voice a low whisper. How could you be so careless, Eleanor? She saw the back of David as he walked away. His shoulders slumped, after telling her he wasn't ready, that it was her choice, her problem. And most vividly, she saw a ghost. The ghost of a life that never was, a tiny, spectral presence that had followed her for 15 years, a constant, silent reminder of her shame and her loss. These images did not parade through her mind in an orderly fashion. They exploded behind her eyes in a simultaneous, blinding flash. The roaring in her ears intensified, drowning out her mother's horrified gasp and Charlotte's sharp, "Sophia, that's enough!" The world outside of her own head had ceased to exist. The gilded sparrow, with its cream-colored walls and soft lighting, melted away. Her family, their faces a gallery of shock and discomfort, became blurry, indistinct shapes. There was only the table, the battlefield, and there was only the enemy, sitting across from her, her face glowing with the ugly, radioactive light of her victory. Sophia's smile was still in place, a perfect, painted-on expression of faux concern. It was the smile of someone who had just delivered a fatal blow and was relishing the slow, agonizing death of her victim. But Eleanor was not dying. She was being born. Something ancient and primal was uncoiling in the pit of her stomach. It was a serpent of pure, undiluted rage that had been dormant for 35 years, fed on a steady diet of slights, insults, and condescension. It slithered up her spine, hot as lava, and spread through her veins. Her heart, which a moment before had felt like a block of ice, began to pound against her ribs with a violent, concussive force. Her hands, resting in her lap, curled into fists so tight her knuckles turned white. She looked at Sophia, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time. She saw past the perfect hair, the expensive dress, the flawless makeup. She saw the gnawing insecurity, the desperate need to be the center of attention, the black hole of envy that could only be filled by diminishing others. She saw a small, cruel, pathetic woman. And the sight did not evoke pity. It stoked the fire. The serpent reached her brain, and all rational thought was incinerated. There was no past, no future. There was only this single, eternal moment of pure, crystalline hate. The complex tapestry of social contracts, of familial obligation, of right and wrong, was burned away, leaving only the raw, exposed nerve of her pain, and the overwhelming, instinctual need to make it stop. Her movements were not her own. They were fluid, economical, and utterly detached from any conscious decision-making process. Her hand, the one that had been clutching her wine glass, moved with a preternatural speed. She did not throw the glass. She did not smash it. Her fingers simply tightened, and the delicate crystal stem snapped between them with a sound like a gunshot in the sudden, tomb-like silence of the table. The sharp edge of the broken stem pressed into her palm, but she felt no pain. Across the table, Sophia's smile faltered. A flicker of fear, or perhaps just surprise, entered her eyes. For the first time, she seemed to realize she had pushed too far. She had mistaken a dormant volcano for a gentle, grassy hill. Eleanor rose from her chair. The movement was slow, deliberate, almost graceful. The scrape of the chair legs against the polished wooden floor was unnaturally loud. Everyone was frozen, statues in a tableau of horror. Her father's mouth was agape. Her mother's hand was pressed to her chest. Michael looked from his wife to his sister, his face a mask of paralyzed disbelief. Charlotte had half risen from her seat, her hand outstretched, as if to ward off what was coming. "Ellie, no," she breathed, the words lost in the roaring that filled Eleanor's head. Eleanor's eyes never left Sophia's. She took one step around the table, then another. She was vaguely aware of a commotion at the periphery, of other diners turning to look, of a waiter starting to move toward them. But they were all figures in a dream, distant and irrelevant. Sophia tried to stand, to push her chair back, but she was too slow. She was trapped between the table and the plush banquette. She raised her hands in a defensive gesture, her voice, for the first time, losing its confident, musical quality. It was thin and shaky. "Eleanor, what are you doing? I was just joking. It was a joke. It was the worst possible thing she could have said. A joke. The desecration of Eleanor's deepest trauma, the public airing of her most painful secret, was a joke. The serpent inside Eleanor lunged. She reached the chair beside Sophia. In the center of the table, next to the vase of now wilting anniversary flowers, sat a heavy crystal water pitcher, still half full. Without breaking eye contact with Sophia, Eleanor's free hand shot out and gripped the pitcher's thick, ornate handle. It was heavier than she expected, solid and cold. Felt right in her hand. It felt like an extension of her own righteous fury. She raised it high above her head. The first scream was Charlotte's. A raw, piercing shriek of terror that finally shattered the spell holding everyone captive. Michael lunged forward, shouting, "Ellie, stop!" But he was clumsy, tangled in his own chair, a moment too late. Eleanor brought the pitcher down. It connected with the side of Sophia's head with a sickening, hollow thud that was somehow both wet and crunchy. The sound was obscene. It was the sound of something precious and intricate and irreplaceable being destroyed. Sophia's head snapped to the side, and a spray of dark red, impossibly bright against the cream-colored wall, erupted from her temple. Her eyes, which had been wide with terror, went blank. The light in them was just extinguished. Her body went limp, slumping sideways in the chair. But Eleanor was not finished. The rage was a physical thing, a blind, ravenous beast that demanded to be fed. One blow was not enough to avenge 15 years of silence. One blow was not enough to quiet the ghost of a child she never had. One blow was not enough to erase the smug, triumphant smile from her memory. She raised the pitcher again, its side now slick with blood and hair, and brought it down on the same spot. And again, and again. She was no longer a librarian. She was not a sister or a daughter. She was a machine of pure destruction, a vessel for a rage that had been denied for a lifetime. With each blow, a guttural, animalistic sound was ripped from her own throat, a sound she had never made before. It was the sound of her soul tearing apart. The chaos around her was absolute. People were screaming, shouting. Her mother was wailing, a high, thin sound of pure anguish. Her father was on his feet, his face ashen, shouting her name over and over again. Eleanor! My God, Eleanor! Mark had grabbed Charlotte, who was hysterical, pulling her back. Finally, Michael reached her. He tackled her from the side, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her away. His strength was immense, born of adrenaline and horror. Stop it! Stop it! Ellie! Oh God, He couldn't finish the sentence. The pitcher fell from Eleanor's hand, landing on the thick carpet with a soft thud. Her arm, which had felt possessed of a superhuman strength, was suddenly weak and trembling. The roaring in her ears began to subside, replaced by the cacophony of the restaurant. The screams, the crying, the frantic shouting of the staff, someone yelling, "Call 911! Somebody call an ambulance!" Eleanor looked down at what she had done. Sophia was slumped over the arm of the banquette. Her beautiful, expensive crimson dress was now a darker, uglier shade of red. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was matted and soaked. Her face, the face that had haunted Eleanor's waking and sleeping life for 5 years, was a ruin. It was an unrecognizable mask of blood and shattered bone. She was utterly, terrifyingly still. The serpent of rage receded, slithering back into its dark pit, leaving behind a cold, desolate emptiness. The white-hot fire was gone, replaced by an encroaching, glacial numbness. Eleanor looked at her hands. One was bleeding from the broken wine glass. The other was spattered with blood. Sophia's blood. It wasn't real. None of this was real. It was a dream, a terrible, vivid nightmare from which she would soon awake. But then she met her father's eyes across the table. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't disappointment. It was a horrified, profound, and absolute lack of recognition. He was looking at her as if she were a monster, and in that moment, The full, crushing weight of reality crashed down upon her. The blood was real. The screams were real. Sophia's still, broken body was real. What did I do? The question was a whisper, a puff of air. She looked at Michael, whose arms were still wrapped around her, his body shaking with sobs. She looked at her mother, who was being held by her father, her face buried in his chest. She looked at Charlotte, who was staring at Sophia's body with a vacant, traumatized expression. This was her family, and she had just destroyed them. She felt a strange calm settle over her. It was the calm of the abyss, the quiet at the center of the hurricane. She had spent her entire life walking on eggshells, trying not to cause a fuss, trying to be good and quiet and invisible. She had swallowed every insult, absorbed every slight, and turned all her anger inward, letting it curdle into a quiet, simmering self-loathing. But the dam had broken. The quiet, invisible woman was gone. In her place stood a murderer. Her knees buckled, and she would have fallen if Michael hadn't been holding her. She was no longer looking at Sophia's body. She was looking inward, at the vast, echoing cavern that had opened up inside her soul. And she knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as a tombstone, that her life was over. The story she had been living, the quiet, sad, lonely story of Eleanor Vance, had just come to a violent, irrevocable end. And a new, terrifying story was just beginning. The sound of distant sirens began to cut through the noise, growing steadily closer. The sirens grew from a distant cry to an overwhelming shriek that seemed to scour the opulent decor from the walls of the Gilded Sparrow, leaving only the raw, ugly reality of what had happened. The world, which had been moving in a surreal, syrupy slow motion, now snapped into a frantic, jerky speed. Waiters in smart black uniforms were herding panicked diners toward the exits. The restaurant manager was on the phone, his voice high and strained. And in the center of it all, in their private alcove of hell, the Vance family remained frozen, a shattered portrait. Eleanor was still held in Michael's grasp, though his grip had loosened. He was no longer restraining her. He was clinging to her, as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had dissolved into chaos. His tears were hot on her shoulder. He was weeping for his wife, for his sister, for his unborn child, for the utter and complete annihilation of his life in the span of 30 seconds. The first to arrive were 2 uniformed police officers. They moved with a grim, practiced efficiency, their eyes taking in the scene with a professional calm that felt jarring and obscene amidst the family's raw, ragged grief. One officer went immediately to Sophia's body, his hand going to her neck, a futile, procedural check for a pulse that was so obviously gone. The other officer's eyes landed on Eleanor. He saw the blood on her hands, the vacant, shell-shocked expression in her eyes, the heavy crystal pitcher lying on the floor beside her. He saw her father pointing a trembling finger at her, his voice a choked whisper. She did it. My daughter. She did it. The officer's voice was calm, but firm, cut through the haze of Eleanor's shock. Sir, I need you to let her go, he said to Michael. Michael didn't respond, his face still buried in his sister's shoulder. Sir, the officer said, more forcefully this time, placing a hand on Michael's arm. Let her go. Now. Slowly, as if moving underwater, Michael released her. He stumbled back, his eyes finally looking at his sister not with grief, but with dawning horror and a flicker of accusation. He looked from her to his wife's body, and a fresh wave of anguish washed over him. He sank to his knees, his hands covering his face, his shoulders heaving. Eleanor stood alone, exposed. The numbness that had enveloped her was beginning to recede, and in its place, a chilling, terrifying clarity was seeping in. She was acutely aware of everything. The cold draft from the open door, the distinct, coppery smell of blood, the way the officer's hand rested on the butt of his holstered gun. She looked down at her navy blue dress, her sensible dress. It was spattered with tiny, dark droplets. Sophia's life, reduced to a stain on her clothing. Ma'am, I need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back, the officer said. His voice was devoid of emotion. It was the voice of procedure, of consequences. Eleanor obeyed without a word. She felt the cold, metallic click of the handcuffs as they closed around her wrists. The sound was deafeningly final. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on the rest of her life. She was no longer Eleanor Vance, librarian, sister, daughter. She was a suspect, a prisoner. As the officer began to lead her away, she caught her mother's eye. Mary Vance was being spoken to by a paramedic, but her gaze was fixed on her younger daughter. Her face was a ruin of grief and disbelief, her eyes asking a single, silent question that would haunt Eleanor forever. Why? She was escorted out of the restaurant, through a gauntlet of shocked onlookers and the flashing red and blue lights of police cars and an ambulance. The night air was cool on her skin. She was placed in the back of a police car, the door shutting with a solid, definitive thud. Through the cage of the back window, she watched as a stretcher was wheeled into the restaurant. A few minutes later, it re-emerged, carrying a black body bag. A wave of nausea, so violent it made her vision swim, washed over her. That was Sophia, her sister-in-law, her victim, the mother of her unborn niece or nephew. The sheer, monstrous finality of it all was beginning to penetrate her shock. The ride to the police station was silent. Eleanor stared out the window at the passing city lights, but she saw nothing. She was replaying the scene over and over in her mind. Sophia's cruel, smiling face, the snap of the wine glass stem, the weight of the pitcher in her hand. The sound, that terrible final sound, it hadn't felt like her. The woman who had brought that pitcher down again and again was a stranger, a creature of pure, unthinking rage. And yet, she had the same hands, the same body. She was that woman. At the station, the world became a series of sterile, impersonal rooms. She was photographed. Her fingerprints were taken, the black ink a stark contrast to the drying blood under her nails. Her blood-spattered dress was taken as evidence, and she was given a paper jumpsuit that crinkled with every movement. The indignity of it barely registered. She felt disconnected from her own body, a ghost observing a grim and tedious process. She was placed in a small, windowless interrogation room. A metal table, 3 chairs. She sat and waited. Time became meaningless. An hour passed, maybe 2. She stared at the blank wall, her mind a maelstrom of fractured thoughts and images. The door finally opened, and 2 detectives entered. One was older, with tired eyes and a graying mustache. The other was younger, with a sharp, impatient energy. Eleanor Vance, the older detective, whose name was Miller, said, "It wasn't a question." He sat down across from her and opened a file. "I'm Detective Miller, this is Detective Sanchez. We have some questions for you about what happened tonight at the Gilded Sparrow." He read her rights in a flat, monotone voice. She nodded numbly when he asked if she understood them. "Do you want a lawyer, Eleanor?" he asked. She thought for a moment. A lawyer was what a person who wanted to fight this would ask for. A person who thought there was a way out. She knew with absolute certainty that there was no way out. "No," she said, her voice raspy. "I don't want a lawyer." Detective Sanchez leaned forward, his expression hard. "So you admit it, then? You assaulted Sophia Vance." Assaulted. The word sounded so clinical, so inadequate. "She's dead, isn't she?" Miller nodded slowly. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Blunt force trauma to the head. Eleanor closed her eyes. Hearing the words spoken aloud made it undeniably real. Dead. She had killed her. "Why did you do it, Eleanor?" Miller asked, his voice softer than his partner's. "Your family said there was an argument. What did she say to you?" And so Eleanor told them. The words came out in a flat, emotionless torrent. She told them about the years of condescending remarks, the belittling, the constant, targeted cruelty. She told them about her struggle with IVF, the pain and the grief of that failure. And she told them what Sophia had said tonight. She repeated the words that had been the spark, the final, unforgivable provocation. "She said it was a shame I'd never be a real woman," Eleanor recounted, her voice cracking for the first time. "And then she mentioned David. She said maybe it was for the best that I couldn't have children. Who's David? Sanchez asked, his pen poised over his notepad. And for the first time in 15 years, Eleanor spoke of him to someone other than a therapist. She told them about the teenage pregnancy, the fear, the secret abortion that her parents had arranged, the shame she had carried ever since. She explained that it wasn't just that Sophia knew. It was that she had used it as a weapon, in front of her entire family, at her parents' anniversary dinner, moments after announcing her own pregnancy. She wanted to destroy me, Eleanor whispered, looking at her own trembling hands on the cold metal table. She wanted to show everyone how pathetic I was. And for a second, she won. She didn't offer it as an excuse. She had no excuses. It was simply the truth. She was a woman who had been systematically, psychologically tormented, and tonight she had broken. She answered all of their questions, leaving nothing out. The confession was a strange sort of release, a final, painful shedding of a lifetime of secrets. When she was finished, a profound exhaustion settled over her, so heavy it felt like she might never stand up again. She was led to a holding cell, a concrete bench, a toilet, a thin, scratchy blanket. The metal door clanged shut, and she was alone with the silence. But it was not a peaceful silence. It was a silence filled with the echoes of screams, the memory of that terrible sound, and the face of her father as he looked at her like a monster. This was her new reality. This was the reckoning. Miles away, in a quiet, suburban house, the remnants of the Vance family were gathered. But they were not a family anymore. They were a collection of traumatized individuals, marooned together on an island of grief. Robert and Mary sat on their sofa, aged a decade in a few hours, staring blankly at a television that wasn't on. Charlotte and Mark were there, Charlotte having made the necessary, horrifying phone calls to lawyers and other family members, moving on autopilot. Michael had refused to come. He had gone to the hospital and then to the morgue to formally identify his wife. He had returned to the empty, silent home he had shared with Sophia, a home that was supposed to be filled with the sounds of a baby's laughter, and had methodically begun to pack a bag. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he could never look at his sister again without seeing the woman who had murdered his wife and child. The rift in the family was not a crack. It was a chasm, deep and uncrossable. They were bound together by a tragedy that also made it impossible for them to ever truly be together again. Every future holiday, every birthday, every memory would be tainted by the events of this night. The name Eleanor, once a part of them, was now a source of shame and horror. The name Sophia was a wound that would never heal. In her cold cell, Eleanor finally began to cry. The tears were not for herself, not for the life she had lost. They were for the ghost of a baby that had haunted her for 15 years, and for the ghost of a new baby, one that had been full of promise and hope just a few hours ago. They were for her brother, whose life she had shattered. They were for her parents, whose golden years she had turned to ash. She had spent her life feeling invisible, silenced. But in one explosive, horrific act of violence, she had made herself seen. She had found her voice, and it was a roar of destruction. The shocking words from her sister-in-law had been the cause, and her murderous outburst had been the effect. But the story didn't end there. It ended here, in the cold, silent aftermath, where a broken woman in a paper jumpsuit was left to contemplate the terrible, irreversible truth. Some words are weapons, and some wounds, once opened, can consume the entire world.